All right, guys. So here we go. Last night, Donald Trump officially ordered the United States military to engage Iran in an illegal and unconstitutional offensive war of aggression, striking multiple different nuclear sites inside of Iran. So here is the direct statement from Donald Trump himself from his Truth Social account. He says, "We have completed our very successful attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan." Now, as to the notion that this was a quote-unquote successful attack in terms of destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities, we'll get to more of that here in a second. It seems like that's definitely, at the bare minimum, up in the air and debatable, but that's what Donald Trump is claiming. He continues saying all planes are now outside of Iranian airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site Fordow, and all planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to great American warriors. There is no military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention on this matter. Absolutely bizarre way to end off this statement here, saying now is the time for peace. After the United States and Israel engaged Iran, again, in an offensive, illegal war of aggression, after you blew up the negotiating table, you killed some of Iran's top negotiators. Now you're saying, after we just bombed your nuclear sites, this is the time for peace. I mean, it's just a sick joke here from Donald Trump. Now we continue because we have a video of Donald Trump flanked on his left and right here by his Vice President, J.D. Vance, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, I guess giving him like emotional support as he made this address to the American people. Let's go ahead and watch through a little bit of this here.
Ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
So, threatening further military action from the United States directly, it appears they are also calling Iran the bully of the Middle East. Simultaneously, while Israel is attacking inside of Lebanon, they're attacking inside of the West Bank, inside of Gaza, inside of Syria, and now inside of Iran as well. I mean, just kind of a ridiculous, farcical notion there at face value.
For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing.
I mean, I wonder why, right? I wonder why in Iran they may chant something like death to America, death to Israel. Like, you can go and look up the Ayatollah Khamenei's explanation as to what that actually means to them. But the notion that the United States has not created the enemies that we have around the world is kind of ridiculous to me. Again, at face value, like when in Iran, they chant death to America, death to Israel. They're talking about American policies. They're talking about American imperialism. They're talking about the United States militarily imposing our will in the region against the will of the populations of these various countries in the Middle East. I mean, that's kind of what they're talking about there. But I guess chants are a justification to spark off another bloody, deadly, war in the Middle East that will end in nothing but destabilization and chaos for years to come.
Blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago.
Okay, so he goes on from there, but a couple of things that I think are noteworthy from what he just said there. Again, he doubles down on the notion that it's up to Iran at this point to come back to the negotiating table, to fight for peace, as if the United States and Israel didn't just, again, blow up the negotiating table, kill some of the top Iranian negotiators, and launch an offensive war of aggression against them, as if they were the ones who violated some sort of a possible potential for a peaceful diplomatic resolution to this situation. No, that was the United States and Israel who did that. The other thing that I think is noteworthy from this short, 3.5-minute speech here is that he does not even pretend as if there was a direct threat to the United States. He speaks about Israel not even as if it's our 51st state here, but as if it's our capital of our country, right? He says, we have eliminated this threat to Israel, which it's highly debatable, if not, I would say outright false, that there was a direct threat to Israel from Iran's nuclear program in any sort of immediate future. But he talks about Israel as if it's the United States of America. Keep in mind, it is constitutionally up to the U.S. Congress as to whether or not we are going to declare war on another country, right? There are some exceptions there where the president can take like immediate action if there's some imminent threat that's bound for the American people or something like that. But he doesn't even pretend that that's the case. He says maybe there was some hypothetical threat to Israel because maybe hypothetically in the future Iran could develop a nuclear weapon and then potentially they could use that against Israel. Like, this is not our fucking country, man. This is a foreign country that we're talking about here. And a hypothetical, really, if we're being honest, non-existent threat to that country that he is using to justify an offensive war of aggression. I mean, it's just utterly and completely insane. Now, we continue in terms of the so-called, I guess, success of these strikes. Now, I want to make it clear up front. We don't have full information here, but both because, Iran is not going to come out and give us, high definition footage of the aftermath of the destruction of these nuclear facilities, and also because of censorship from Israel and from the United States military. Like, there are a lot of different factors that are at play right now in terms of limiting the scope of what we know about the so-called success of these strikes. But just a couple of noteworthy things that I've seen floating around on this topic. Here from Dropsite News, they say that Iran says that the nuclear sites that were struck were evacuated ahead of the strikes. According to Francis 24's Tehran correspondent, a political deputy to Iran's state TV chief, says that the Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan nuclear facilities had been evacuated prior to the strikes. He reports that Iran maintains there is no risk of radiation as high enriched uranium stockpiles had already been moved. Now, again, is this the truth? I don't know. This is the claim that's coming from somebody who is obviously getting information from Tehran themselves. But, whether or not this is true, the fact that it's still up in the air as to whether or not this was some sort of like a decisive and successful strike here from the United States in terms of eliminating the possibility of Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon, the main point here is that this gives you an indication that the United States is not done, right? Israel is not done in this offensive war of aggression. They are going to try to claim that this strike, although it was, according to the, in the words of Donald Trump, highly successful, this was not enough, right? And so we need to continue with this offensive war of aggression. That's what I'm reading from this, right? And I do find it dubious, to say the least, that this strike was successful in the sense that it prevented Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon in any sort of foreseeable future. Now, we continue. To back up that sort of line here from the Washington Post, they had an excerpt here saying that a senior U.S. official similarly acknowledged that the American strike on the Fordow site, which is the key nuclear site in Iran, did not destroy the heavily fortified facility, but said that the strike had severely damaged it, taking it off the table. The person noted that even 12 bunker-busting bombs that were used during this strike could not destroy the site. So again, this idea that like this was enough to finish the current situation, to end all of this, I don't think that that's the case. And I think that the United States and Israel are going to use the current situation as a justification to say this was good, it was a success, but it was not enough. And so we need to continue here. Now, we're not even at this point getting into the Iranian response to strikes on their nuclear facility. We have the possibility hanging in the air of Iran shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, which could have drastic implications economically, globally, around the entire world, including here in the United States, in terms of gas prices, in terms of energy prices, in terms of a whole bunch of different things that could create a cascading effect if the Iranian government decides to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. We also have the possibility of Iran deciding to retaliate against American troops who are in the region by the tens of thousands in Iraq, in Syria, in the UAE, in Saudi, in all of these different places around the region. They could also choose to strike back there, and then that could lead to a different set of circumstances as well. We don't know as of me recording this video right now what the Iranian response is actually going to look like. But anyways, we continue here because we have JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States, giving some sort of, I guess, a warning here to the Iranians in terms of what the United States is going to do if they respond against U.S. troops.
What we're prepared for is if they attack us in a maximal direction, first of all, we have got maximum defensive posture. I think that we're going to be able to defend as many of our people as possible. And of course, I'd encourage Americans to pray for our guys in the Middle East because, yes, they are under a significant amount of duress and a significant amount of threat right now. But then, of course, John, if the Iranians attack us, they're going to be met with overwhelming force. And I don't think the president could be clear about this. If you look at what we did yesterday, John, we did not attack the nation of Iran. We did not attack any civilian targets. We didn't even attack military targets outside of the 3 nuclear weapons facilities that we thought were important to accomplish our goal of preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. So how Iran responds, I think, is ultimately the ball is in their court. But if you look at what we did, it was very precise, very narrowly tailored to our objective. And if the Iranians decide to expand this, then that's ultimately their decision, and the President of the United States will respond in kind.
Okay. So again, just to remind everybody of like the baseline reality that we are all living in, that it seems like most of mainstream media, that it seems like the Trump administration and most of the, political establishment here in the United States doesn't want to talk about. The fundamental reality here is that Iran was not on the verge of developing and weaponizing a nuclear weapon. That was not even plausibly going to happen in the immediate future. They were in the middle of Iran nuclear deal 2.0 talks as the US and Israel launched this attack. There is no US intelligence that suggested that there was an imminent threat either to Israel or to the United States of America. So we have to keep reminding ourselves of that just basic fundamental reality here. So when we have somebody like JD Vance who says we didn't attack the nation of Iran, we just attacked, their military targets, their nuclear sites, to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. It's like they were not on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon. They could, they have the capability to work towards that. That's for sure. But the idea that this was some sort of an imminent threat to the United States or to Israel is just not the case. And as a reminder, again, this is not about nuclear weapons. None of this, of what we're covering here today, has anything to do with nuclear weapons, right? That's sort of like a side issue. This is about regime change, and it's about hegemonic control of the region for the United States and for Israel. Iran poses a threat to that hegemonic control, and they are using weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons or the imminent threat from that as a justification to push towards regime change. That's what this is actually about. So again, just nonsensical shit here from JD Vance. We continued. He says, we're not at war with Iran. We're not at war with Iran. We're at war with their nuclear facilities, is what JD Vance says here in this clip. You're not at war. Think about this, guys. Like, if the United States, if some foreign country, if China or Russia or whoever the case may be, struck our nuclear sites, struck nothing else except our nuclear sites, do you think that the United States would consider that an act of war? Do you think that we would consider that sort of just like a targeted precision strike against, valid military target? No, of course not. Of course that would be an act of war. What the fuck are we talking about here? This is the Vice President of the United States of America who, with a straight, deadpan face, is saying, we're not at war. We're not at war. We just backed up Israel engaging Iran in an offensive, illegal war of aggression during the middle of diplomatic talks. And then we are now launching an offensive attack against their nuclear facilities. But that's not a war. That's not an act of war. We're not at war with Iran. What the fuck would you call this then? I mean, it's just insane. It's like the gaslighting is at unbelievable levels at this point. We also have here, and this is the most breaking news that you'll see in this video, here from Donald Trump just a couple of minutes ago. He says, it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, whatever the fuck that means, why wouldn't there be regime change? Make Iran great again. So now we have not just, this floating here from Israeli officials that we've covered over the last couple of days in terms of the prospect of regime change. We not only have neocons here in the United States demanding regime change, guys like John Bolton, but now we have Donald Trump himself floating the idea of regime change and saying, well, maybe it's not politically correct, but if Iran doesn't want to make Iran great again, whatever nebulous, interpretation you could garner from that actually would be, then there's going to be regime change. So this is Donald Trump directly siding with exactly what we've been laying out over the last couple of days, that this is the true goal, is regime change. Now he's just finally admitting it and sort of putting it out there into the ethos to normalize that as a matter of conversation. Now, we continue here. Here we have Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, on Face the Nation over on MSNBC. Let's go ahead and watch a little bit of this clip here.
On a phrase you just word, weaponization ambitions. Are you saying there that the United States did not see intelligence that the Supreme Leader had ordered weaponization?
That's irrelevant. I see that question being asked in the media. That's an irrelevant question.
No,
they had
that is
everything
the
they need
key
to build
point
a
in U.S. intelligence assessment. You know
no,
that.
it's not.
Yes, it was.
No, it's
that
not.
The political decision had not
I know
been
that better
made.
than you know that, and I know that that's not the case.
But I'm asking you whether the order was given.
And the people who say that, it doesn't matter if the order was given. They have everything they need to build nuclear weapons. Why would you bury things in a mountain, 300 feet under the ground?
Right.
Why would you bury why do they have 60% enriched uranium? You don't need 60% enriched uranium. The only countries in the world that have uranium at 60% are countries that have nuclear weapons, because they can quickly make it 90. They have all the elements. They have. Why do they have a space program? Is Iran going to go to the moon? No. They're trying to build an ICBM.
No, but
so
that's a question. That's a question of intent. And in the intelligence assessment that it was that Iran wanted to be a threshold state and use this leverage. I'm talking about the public March assessment, and that's why I was asking you if you know something more from March.
That's also an inaccurate representation of it. That's an accurate representation of it. That's not how intelligence is read. That's not how intelligence is used. Here's what the whole world knows. Now, forget about intelligence. What the IAEA knows. They are enriching uranium well beyond anything you need for a civil nuclear program.
Okay, so what are they talking about here? Well, the reporter is hinting at what we covered a couple of days ago, which was Tulsi Gabbard back in, I believe, March or a couple of months ago. She gave the intelligence assessment that Iran was not actively working towards a nuclear weapon, right? She told that in front of Congress, in front of the entire world. That was the conclusion of the United States government just a couple of months ago. And the question here from the reporter is like, well, has something changed? Right? Is it now the assessment of the U.S. intelligence community that Iran has activated their push to a nuclear weapon, which they haven't had activated since like 2003, you could make a case for? And Marco Rubio's response to that is that that's irrelevant. That is an irrelevant question as to whether or not Iran was actually pushing for a nuclear weapon. He's basically arguing that the fact that Iran has enriched up to 60%, right, which they've done over the last number of years since Donald Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, the previous Iran nuclear deal 1.0 that was signed under Obama that Trump ripped to shreds, he's saying there's no reason why you would ever have to do that unless you were trying to push for a bomb. And so therefore we have a justification in launching an offensive war of aggression against them. The response to his question as to why you would enrich to that level is exactly what the reporter was just saying there, which is that you want that as a matter of leverage, basically from Iran's perspective, to say, we don't want to get a nuclear weapon effectively, right? We want to cut a deal with the United States to remove sanctions on Iran, and we will agree to never develop a nuclear weapon. We'll have a civilian nuclear program. We will allow for international observers to come into the country to make sure that we are abiding by those standards. But we are going to enrich to a level to where you understand that we could develop a nuclear weapon, right? It is a matter of a leverage in negotiations. That's clear as day. Like, this is very simple shit that we're talking about here. But Marco Rubio is making the case that no, we don't have intelligence to suggest that Iran was on the verge of obtaining a nuclear weapon, or even that they wanted to develop a nuclear weapon. We don't even have intelligence to suggest that they wanted to develop a nuclear weapon, but we are still justified in attacking them because they kind of sort of have all of the pieces that they could hypothetically, if they decided to, develop a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's just, they think we're fucking stupid, guys. They literally think that we're stupid. So there you have Marco Rubio. We also have here on CNN, which has been absolutely atrocious throughout the entirety of this. From what I've seen so far, it seems like MSNBC is at least allowing for some anti-war voices on their network. Fox News is obviously going full balls to the wall, pro-Iran war coverage over the last couple of days and weeks here. CNN is sort of hovering in the middle ground there, definitely leaning heavily on the pro-Iran war side of things. And here we have Scott Jennings on CNN saying, I mean, the Orwellian doublespeak here. He says, this is not an escalation, this is de-escalation. De-escalation is when you bomb a foreign country's nuclear sites, apparently. This is de-escalation. These are the kinds of conversations that are happening in mainstream media right now. We continue on because we had Tim Kaine over here throwing himself into this conversation, kind of calling out the hypocrisy here of having an Iraq war buildup 2.0 with similar lack of evidence, with a similar claims of weapons of mass destruction, etc., as a justification. So let's go ahead and listen to a little bit of Tim Kaine here.
Say, look, America was lied into a war in 2002 against Iraq with a Republican administration giving us false information about Iraq's weapons program. I have grave concern that we're going down the same path. Donald Trump's own national security officials have stated that Iran was not close to having a nuclear weapon. And Shannon, just Friday night, the Israeli foreign minister said that its bombing campaign over the last 9 days had set back the Iranian nuclear program by at least 2 or 3 years. There was no imminent threat to the United States from this nuclear program. It was an offensive war of choice by a president without consultation with Congress. We're going to have the briefing this week. We'll have a vote. I know many Republicans will fall in line and say a president can do whatever he wants. But I hope members of the Senate and the House will take their Article I responsibility seriously and say, you didn't even notify us, much less get an authorization. The U.S. should not be at war without a vote of Congress.
So there you have it. I mean, again, this is sort of like a baseline point here that Tim Kaine is making here. Number one, that, again, the United States had no intelligence that Iran was on the verge of developing a weaponized nuclear program or anything like that. Also pointing out the double standard of Fox News and other mainstream media and Republican officials lying us into the war in Iraq, claiming similarly that there were weapons of mass destruction, but also pointing out the War Powers Resolution that has been floating around Congress over the last couple of days. Obviously, I think he's one of the few members of Congress who is behind it at this point. But to be clear, Donald Trump does not have legal or constitutional authority to launch a war against Iran without congressional approval. He just doesn't. That's a completely brazen, unconstitutional act there from Donald Trump. Now we move on here to Thomas Massie, who I obviously, especially economically, would have many, many, many disagreements with, to say the least. But this guy right here, a Republican member of Congress, is one of the only consistent, principled, anti-war members of the Republican Party. And so I think it's important to highlight the divide that's happening right now with Thomas Massie, and it seems like the entire rest of his party. So here he is, and he's been consistently speaking out against war with Iran, and here he is talking specifically on AIPAC and their influence in U.S. politics on behalf of the government of Israel.
What he promised us was we would put America first. And I think there are still voices in this administration. You've still got J.D. Vance. You've still got Tulsi Gabbard. You still, RFK Jr., you still got calmer heads that could prevail.
They were not persuasive in this case, clearly.
Well, somebody was persuasive. AIPAC is very persuasive. For instance, the Israeli lobby in Congress. If you look at my colleagues' feeds now, they all look the same. They're all tweeting the same message, that we've got to support Israel and we've got to do this. What he promised us was...
Okay, so interesting there. From a Republican member of Congress pointing out, and this is something that, if you're on Twitter regularly, you see this, right? The entirety of the AIPAC-backed coalition within Congress is tweeting basically almost verbatim the same things about standing with Israel and Iran can't have a nuclear weapons program and praising Trump for his strikes on Iran. So the impact of the Israel lobby is vital at this kind of a situation, right? We know who most members of Congress are getting their marching orders from, right? They're not representing the best interests of their constituents. They're not representing the American people. They're representing their donors, the lobbying organizations that back them. And AIPAC and other Israel-affiliated lobbying groups being some of the most powerful lobbying organizations in the country. So he's pointing out that, and again, obviously pointing out that members of his own party are deeply intertwined with groups like AIPAC. Now, in terms of their take on all of this, here we had a recent post, I believe this is from Facebook, from AIPAC directly. They say, President Trump has taken historic and decisive action against Iran's nuclear program, which has been a long-time threat to the security of the United States and peace of the world. Has it really, though? They say this justified action was taken as Iran was on the verge of acquiring a nuclear weapon. Not true. And after the Iranian regime rejected President Trump's repeated diplomatic efforts to peacefully resolve the crisis. Again, not true. None of this is true at all. I mean, at every single level. This is Israeli government talking points that we're seeing here that are regurgitated by a coalition like AIPAC that are then fed to U.S. politicians to repeat on the national stage in order to justify this illegal and unconstitutional act of aggression. Now, we also have here from Chris Murphy, the senator from the Democratic senator from Connecticut. He says, I was briefed on the intelligence last week. Iran posed no imminent threat of attack to the United States. Iran was not close to building a deliverable nuclear weapon. The negotiations Israel scuttled with their strikes held the potential for success. So Chris Murphy is no radical lefty, to say the least. I mean, this guy is sort of a standard establishment Democratic type figure. And here he is saying the intelligence is very clear, from the United States at least, that there was no threat of attack against the United States, that Iran was not on the verge of acquiring a deliverable nuclear weapon, and the negotiations could have succeeded if they weren't sabotaged by the U.S. and Israel. And he's entirely correct about every single layer of this analysis. We continue. Hear from Anthony Sabatini. Just in terms of the potential reverberating consequences of this U.S. attack, Iran, their parliament, has just voted to close the Hormuz Strait. An oil crisis is imminent. This was completely avoidable. Our foreign policy does not serve the interests of Americans. Now, what I will say about this is that, yes, the Iranian parliament voted in favor of shutting down the Hormuz Strait. This does not necessarily mean that Iran is going to do that. They may do that. They may not do that. We don't have official word yet from the higher levels of the Iranian government in terms of a decisive decision on this. But the reason that I bring this up is that this is vitally important in terms of where this conflict goes moving forward. So what you're seeing right here on your screen is the Strait of Hormuz. There's about 1/5 of the global energy supplies, oil, natural gas, etc., that come through this strait from the surrounding countries that you see on your map here. Iran militarily has the capacity to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, to effectively make it impossible for ships to, travel through this region. This is kind of the, I guess, using hyperbole here, the nuclear option for Iran, because shutting down the Strait of Hormuz would create cascading, massive reverberating effects throughout the entire global economy in terms of gas prices, in terms of energy prices, in terms of the prices of everything. This would massively disrupt the entire global economy. This is something that Iran, I guess, has a sort of like an arrow in its quiver if it wants to use it. If the Iranian government feels as though the United States and Israel are on the verge of destroying the Iranian state, then they could pull this switch. They might do it in the next couple of days. They might do it in the next couple of weeks. They might not do it at all. But this is a massively important, linchpin here that people have to be paying attention to, because this could have massive reverberating effects, which could then lead to the United States or to surrounding countries or to, countries around the world getting much more heavily involved in this. Because if they decide to shut this down, there's not a country on the face of the planet that will not be affected by it. So this is something we got to keep our eye on. We also had here Bernie Sanders as he was speaking to a crowd in his Fight Oligarchy tour, being informed in real time that the United States had just struck Iran. And you can see the uproar here from the crowd against a possibility of this war. So let's go ahead and watch this clip here.
This is a statement statement from Donald Trump, quote, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran," etc. I agree. And I want to tell you something. Not only is this news that I just heard, the second alarming that all of you have just heard, but it is so grossly unconstitutional. All of you know that the only entity that can take this country to war is the U.S. Congress. The president does not have the right.
So obviously he's entirely correct about that, and you can see the organic crowd there, people on the ground revolting against the act of aggression from the Trump administration. Now, I'll finish off this video reminding you guys that as all of this is happening, as we are spiraling directly towards an escalating conflict with Iran at the decision of the Trump administration, we also have this happening in the background. And, you know, obviously my content over the last couple of weeks has shifted towards heavily focusing on Israel and Iran for obvious reasons. That doesn't mean that the genocide in Gaza is not still continuing at full force. If anything, it's accelerating as time is going on. And the international media, the mainstream press, especially here in the United States, has basically shoved this off to the side. They're no longer even bothering to cover it. But this is extremely important, guys. The genocide in Gaza is entering, I wouldn't even say entering, it is at its final conclusion. What we are witnessing right now is human beings at an industrial scale being treated, I wouldn't even say as animals. Because as I said in a previous video, looking at the scenes out of Gaza, like as you see in this image right here, Americans would not even stand for animals at a zoo being treated in this kind of a fashion. We are seeing not only a continued mass starvation campaign of the 2 million population inside of Gaza, but we have seen the so-called humanitarian sites, the so-called, food aid sites inside of Gaza turned into killing fields, where we have at this point seen hundreds of Palestinians who are desperate, who are hungry, who are trying to feed their starving family members, show up to these sites and be massacred day after day after day. This is what the current iteration of the Gaza genocide looks like. Here from Amnesty International, they say, with the world looking elsewhere, the militarization of aid adds another layer to Israel's deliberate imposition of genocidal conditions against Palestinians in the occupied Gaza Strip. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed or injured at or near aid distribution posts since Israel's weaponization of humanitarian aid distribution system was imposed at the end of May. Families are being forced into an impossible choice: die of hunger or die trying to get food. Seeking shelter should never be a death trap. Israel must end its genocide and lift the blockade now. We also have here from Linda Mahmoud responding here to a Haaretz article saying Israel strikes kill 202 in Gaza in just 48 hours, according to local health officials. And she says, remember when an Israeli official, a member of the Knesset, bragged that they could kill 100 people a day in Gaza without anybody being shocked? They're still doing it. No outrage and no condemnation, no coverage. And she's entirely correct here. This was something that came out just a couple of weeks ago. There was an Israeli member of the Knesset who openly said, listen, at this point, we can kill 100 Palestinians per day inside of Gaza, and nobody's going to say anything. There's no international outrage. There's no international condemnation. The focus is elsewhere. And it's crazy to me that that's the world that we're living in. That there can be hundreds of people who are massacred day after day after day. That these aid distribution sites are turned into killing fields, and there's no condemnation. There's no international outrage. There's no pushback to this at this point. We are witnessing the in real time full dehumanization of Palestinians, the in real time industrialization of the slaughter of innocent men, women, and children on a daily basis. This is what Gaza looks like at this point. That you can have 202 Palestinians in Gaza killed within a 48-hour period. You won't even hear this reported in the mainstream media. This is just what we have accepted as normal. And remember, it was just a couple of weeks ago when they formally set up these, again, so-called aid distribution sites inside of Gaza, and there was that first day massacre that took place. And there was a full frontal offensive from Israeli politicians, from Israeli spokesmen, from the US media, denying that Israel had anything to do with this, blaming it on Hamas, deflecting whatever, their usual games that they play. And then, after we had already debunked their lies surrounding that initial aid massacre, and we came to the conclusion that, yes, of course, this was IDF forces who massacred dozens of people at this aid distribution site, after the first one, then it's just normalized. Then you can have day after day after day, dozens of people killed every single goddamn day. And they don't even bother to deny it anymore. They don't even bother to run the Hezbollah sort of like propaganda game to deny their involvement in these massacres. Now it's been normalized at this point. So this is what we're seeing every single day inside of Gaza. Again, you can see the images here of what these aid distribution sites look like. Thousands, if not tens of thousands of people desperately in search of aid, who are being fired at by Israeli tanks, by Israeli snipers, by Israeli, armed fire every single day. This is what it looks like. So cannot forget that this is what the background of the escalation with Israel and the United States and Iran, this is what's happening in the background. Not to mention that even more forgotten than the current genocide in Gaza is the ongoing ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. The fact that we now have, under the guise of all of this, Israel rapidly escalating their offensive ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, pushing by the hundreds people out of their homes, out of their communities, using military force, using terrorist tactics in the West Bank as well. All of this is going on in the background. So at the same time, it's vital and it's important that we cover everything that's going on with the lead up to the U.S. getting more directly, or at this point, directly involved in a war against Iran. This is all happening in the background, and we can't let that slide. So I'll leave you guys off with that. There's your update for today. Appreciate all of the support you guys have been giving to the channel over the last couple of days and weeks. Obviously, the channel is growing at this point. If you guys like, comment, subscribe, obviously helps for me to continue to put out this kind of a content.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying